Before I begin, I want to put a trigger warning here for discussions of PTSD and trauma. This will both be personal discussions that won't go into too much depth, but also reflections on Korra Alone and the manifestation of PTSD in the Legend of Korra series, which is what I'm looking at today, and exploring how Legend of Korra looked at PTSD. Now, I also want to say that I am now a professional in PTSD. I have no formal training in any of this, so all of what I'm going to be discussing and talking about is my own personal feelings and personal life of my own experience with PTSD, trauma and depression, anxiety. So this is of course a personal video, so please do be respectful in the comments for anyone who could be triggered by what you are saying, and also keeping in mind that I am also a human being and I have feelings. Now, Legend of Korra is a truly fascinating series, particularly with what they did with this exploration of trauma with Korra in the episode Korra Alone and subsequent episodes in Book 4. It was a truly fascinating thing for me to see, especially after coming to terms with my own trauma in my life and seeing it manifested in a sense on TV and how it was treated and explored. So I'm going to be going point by point in different aspects to do with Korra's own dealing of her trauma in the series, and what I found interesting about it and what I identified with it, and how the Legend of Korra series itself did it. And I will admit, it wasn't perfect. No exploration of PTSD is going to be perfect, but for what it was something that I can appreciate at that level. What I want to look at first is the initial part that we see of Korra's interaction with her own trauma, which is the fact that she has the physical trauma of being paralysed to begin with, her anger and her denial of what she is going through. While she is aware of everything that's going on due to the actual physical trauma that she's experienced as well, there's a very clear denial in what she's going through, in that while she is recognising what has happened to her, from what we see of her interactions with her mother, of her interactions with Katara, while she is angry, she's also seemingly numb to what she is going through. Her moment with her mother where she's watching the, I guess it's not going to be called the Northern Lights, but the Aurora Borealis sort of thing in the world, and her mother speaks to her and she does cry, but she's seemingly unfeeling to what is happening. And we see that a lot throughout that episode as well, such as her being in the fighting ring and allowing herself to always be physically punished. Everything that she's going through is her being numb to things. She's not seemingly experiencing or dealing with anything in what can be considered a healthy way. She has her anger, and that's what she's holding on to a lot, but all other feelings are seemingly not there, and we get hints of that in the finale of Book 3, where she is subdued and quiet and doesn't really speak at all in that final section of that episode. She has a small moment with Asami, and then every moment after that she's basically quiet. And I think that's the hint of where she was going to in the denial of what's going on, the holding back of these feelings, because dealing with them and experiencing them is like a second load of trauma. And I had something very similar. I was in denial for so long about my own trauma that when I finally admitted to myself what happened, I was completely overwhelmed. I was unfeeling up until that point because I was denying what had truly happened to me. And I think Korra is going through the same. She's latching onto this anger by her frustration and her yelling at Katara, her frustration at herself, and it's all manifested in a different form of trauma, both the physical and mental trauma. And that's what leads into the next part, particularly with the denial. As I mentioned, she has a sort of self-destructive element, and this second part is all about her own self-destruction and purposeful punishment of herself in a way. What she puts herself through is literal further trauma, in a sense. She's going to this fighting ring, she's fighting herself, which is a literal manifestation of self-destruction. She's trying to destroy that part of herself, which ties into that denial. And she's allowing herself to be physically harmed. She's going into fights initially before getting to that point and struggling, and even in her training she becomes untethered and scared. And I think by her having that, and her especially being a prodigy child as well, the fact that she's failing in the aspects that she was strongest in before, in the way I interpret it, is that by her self-destructing physically and mentally also, by her literally fighting that manifestation of herself, it's a further way of her to deny what has happened, but also her sense of believing it's her fault what's happened to her, which is something I also experienced with my own trauma, and something that can often tie into people's trauma in and of itself. You feel you are at fault. And so seeing Korra having this self-destructive element of attacking herself, technically, literally, it's something that I really didn't expect to see. And it's what ties into this next part of fear and physical and mental pain. This is something that we learn in later episodes, but see slightly in Korra Alone itself. Korra is afraid. The physical and mental pain that she is going through of still technically, even though she has overcome and been able to learn to walk again, she still has that physical pain of what she went through. And the mental pain is what's kind of blocking her from doing the things that she used to do, because the denial and all these things are still tying into that so strongly. And her discussions with Toph and later to Zahir as well, the literal confrontation of her trauma, they recognise this fear that she has and see that that is what's blocking her. And with Toph, while she is able to kind of recognise that there herself, the fear is still there. That interaction with Zahir comes much later and she's still afraid. And it's something that's very common with someone who is undergoing this sort of trauma and trying to deal with it. The fear, in a sense, is always going to be there in some form. And having this continue to reappear with Korra, her discussion with Toph, that literal fear that she has of seeing Zahir and having to confront that trauma she went through in her past with the man who did it. While it wasn't the best thing in the world in terms of, like, you know, her actually being with the person who did this trauma to her, that manifestation that we have of her confronting this fear and this recognition that fear is always there and people can be powerful and still be afraid, was something that really resonated with me. This recognition that fear isn't weakness. And while, in a sense, some aspects of her fear definitely were a weakness to her in that it wasn't allowing her to confront anything that she needed to deal with, the fact that she still has it shows her as human. And I think that's what I really like about, which sounds really weird to say you like something to do with this, but the long-lasting effects that we see of Korra's physical and mental trauma in Book 4, it's constantly there. Even when we assume that it has been dealt with Toph when she's able to get the last of that poison out, we assume that, oh, it'll all be fine now. But that's not how PTSD works. As we see with her fight with Kuvira, she's still seeing herself in that physical manifestation. She is still not fully accepting of what happened and able to deal with it. It's still there in the back of her mind, still holding her back due to this fear, this anger, this still state of denial, the physical and mental trauma that she's, in a way, going to always have in some form. PTSD doesn't just disappear. And it was something that I really commend the writers for, in that they didn't have it disappear after the removing of the poison. And while it does slightly disappear after her discussion with Zahir, after her confronting, even in the final episode we have this moment of her talking about how this impacted on her. And it's not the best speech in the world. I do like the speech, but it's not the best one in the world. But she still understands that this is going to be with her, that this is going to change her actions and her opinion of what life is going to be in future. And so this long-lasting aspect is realistic and raw, and I appreciate the fact that the writers did this. And it's what leads into this self-acceptance, and in Korra's case, the self-forgiving. Korra has blamed herself completely, in a way, for what happened to her and what she's gone through and everything that's happened. And yet, it's not completely her fault. It's not her fault. The trauma that she's gone through isn't her fault. Maybe some of her actions led to it, but trauma isn't the fault of the person who is experiencing it. And to see her kind of realise this and confront head on in Korra fashion what she went through and who caused this, and coming to accept that it wasn't her fault, that it happened and it wasn't her fault, was a beautiful thing to see. And for her to accept what happened, not necessarily move on from it, because it's not something you can really move on from, but to accept what happened. As someone who's only recently come to accept what happened to me, is a truly beautiful moment that to this day still brings tears to my eyes, because I'm a sap. But all these aspects that we see of these sort of different stages that a person who has undergone trauma goes through in Korra, and while it's still superficial, there's no way you can do it perfectly, and it is superficial in certain areas, but to see it, I think, was a truly beautiful thing that the Legend of Korra series did. Everything that's been brought up in this video is intense. There's no way to say it other than that. And so in the description box are going to be links to mental health services that you can connect to, and hopefully numbers for every country around the world to call if you are in need of help. And there are various different hotlines that hopefully will be beneficial to you in some way. Also linked is the link to LSW, a company that I have recently discovered and been involved with, who provide a box of cards basically with different things to help improve your mental positivity and sort of mindfulness sort of stuff, which mindfulness is brilliant. Go check out some videos on here on YouTube of mindfulness to help with meditation, but LSW is one that I've personally found beneficial for helping to get into that more positive mindset, so that will be linked down there to go check out their website to see if anything on there will be useful to you yourself. There isn't something that is a be-all of end-all for everyone. Nothing is going to work for everyone, so find what works best for you, and I hope you all stay happy and healthy. I would do my normal sign-off, but I think that's the most important thing, is that you guys look after yourselves, be kind to yourselves, and love yourselves.